She was 3 miles into her morning run when she saw a baby Japanese macaque, no bigger than a man's fist, sitting in the middle of the forest road with both arms raised toward her, not in threat, not in play, but in the way that only the very young and the very lost reach toward anything that moves. She was not a veterinarian, not a ranger, just a woman in running clothes standing in a cedar forest with nothing useful in her hands. The rescue station said 6 days before they had a bed. 6 days felt like a number from a different language. Something she did not yet have the grammar to understand. She looked at the monkey, and the monkey looked at her. And neither of them moved for a long moment that she would later describe as the last ordinary moment of that week. The cedar trees on either side of the road were old enough that their canopy had closed completely overhead, turning the morning light green and soft, and in that light, the asphalt looked less like a road and more like the floor of something ancient and still. She had run this road dozens of times and never thought about the trees. She thought about them now. She took 1 step closer, weight forward, slow. Her breath held part way so it wouldn't carry, and then another step, and the monkey watched her come without moving, without flinching, with the calm of something that has already spent all its fear and has nothing left to spend. Its fur was brown and slightly uneven, still growing and soft-looking the way newborn fur is soft before life gets to it. The face was round, the nose flat and pink at the tip, the eyes a dark amber that caught the green light and held it. Its hands were too large for the rest of it. Long-fingered and deeply creased, the hands of something that would grow into them, eventually, if it got the chance. She crouched down to its level, and they looked at each other, and the forest went about its business around them. Birds somewhere up in the canopy, she couldn't see the sound of water moving over stones. Somewhere to the left, a breeze that came through once and did not come back. She had read somewhere years ago that baby macaques separated from their mothers go silent before they go still, and that the silence is the dangerous sign, not the crying. This one was silent. Its fur was completely dry. The asphalt around it dry too. The morning dew already lifted, which meant it had been here since before the sun reached this part of the road, since before 6, and she had started her run at 7:15. She held out 1 finger slowly, the way she used to approach the neighbor's dog when she was small. And the monkey reached out and wrapped both its hands around that single finger and held on. The grip was stronger than she expected. It was not tentative, not exploratory. It was the grip of something that had found what it was looking for and had no intention of letting go. She stayed crouched and did not move, and the grip did not ease. And after a while, she reached for her phone with her free hand and called the rescue station a second time and asked the simplest question. She had, "What can I do wrong right now?" The woman on the other end asked whether the animal was injured, whether it was bleeding, whether it was moving strangely. And she looked at it, at the steady amber eyes, the hands around her finger, the small chest rising and falling, and she said no to each. The woman said the most important thing is warmth. The cold is the fastest danger. Keep it against your body and try to keep it calm. She looked at her running jacket, a light technical layer, the warmest thing she had on her, and she folded it one-handed into a rough pouch. And the monkey watched her do this with an expression she would come to know well over the next 6 days. Focused, slightly skeptical, prepared to reserve judgment until the evidence was in. She wrapped the jacket around it, and it shifted its grip from her finger to the fabric without ever fully releasing, always keeping at least one hand in contact with something that was connected to her. She stood up, tucked the bundle against her chest, left arm cradling it from below, and turned around on the road. Then she ran. Slower than before, her gait adjusted to the weight her left arm held steady, while her right pumped the way it always did. The forest moving past her in that green morning light. Later, she would try to remember the exact moment she decided to take it home, and she would not be able to find one. There was no decision she could locate. There was only the road and the weight of something small breathing against her chest, and the direction she was already running. And that was all there was. A baby monkey had raised its arms on an empty road and waited with complete seriousness for someone to stop. And she had stopped and now she was running home, and the two things were connected in a way that felt less like a decision and more like a sequence, like one note following another. She had run that road home 100 times, but she had never paid attention to how far it actually was until now. Counting each step, keeping her left arm still watching the bundle against her chest for any sign of distress. The entrance to her building appeared through the trees, and she slowed to a walk, catching her breath. Feeling the monkey shift slightly, as her pace changed its grip, tightening for a moment and then loosening again. Inside, she set it on the kitchen counter, still wrapped in the jacket. The apartment was warm, and it smelled like coffee, and the overhead light hummed quietly, and the monkey's eyes moved across everything, the light, the counter, the cabinet handles. The coffee maker with an alertness that was not curiosity, yet just pure processing, the eyes of something filing everything it encountered, because it did not yet know what to discard. Then it gripped her wrist. The sound it made was continuous and high and frayed at the edges, less a cry than a signal. The kind of sound built specifically to make clear thinking impossible. She stood there with a wild animal attached to her wrist at 9 in the morning and felt the clarity of the past 2 hours drain out of her completely. She searched on her phone, one-handed. Every source said something different. Some said to keep it warm. Some said to put it somewhere dark and quiet. Some said she had made an irreversible mistake the moment she touched it on the road. She read that and felt something cold move through her. She put the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment and did not pick it up. Then she picked it up and went looking in a different direction, through older pages, plainer pages. The kind of forums that looked like they had been built by people who cared about the information and not at all about how the page looked. And she found the one she needed a post from years ago, from someone who had worked at a primate facility and who said in plain language that in the first hours, the only thing that matters is keeping the animal warm and in contact with another body. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and brought the monkey against her chest. It cried for 40 minutes. The same sound unbroken, no variation, no pause, and she sat with it and stayed warm and stayed still because there was nothing else to do, and doing nothing was the hardest thing she had done in a long time. Then somewhere around the 40th minute, the crying stopped. All at once, the way a storm stops, not winding down but simply gone, and the kitchen went quiet, and she became aware of her own heartbeat, and then of a smaller, faster one pressed against it. She did not move. The monkey did not move. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone was walking a dog on the street below, and she could hear the dog's nails on the pavement, and then they were gone, and it was quiet again. She sat on the kitchen floor in her running clothes, which were still slightly damp, and she held the monkey and felt it breathe, and the morning moved past the window, and she let it. She named it that afternoon quietly to herself, not out loud yet. The way you name something, when you are telling yourself you are not getting attached, when you are trying to keep a certain distance, and the name is the first sign that the distance is already gone. Coco. The rescue station called to confirm the intake 6 days from now, early morning. And she wrote the date on a piece of paper and put it on the counter where she could see it from the kitchen floor. 6 days in her own handwriting looked different from 6 days on the phone. It looked like something crossable. Coco was asleep against her collarbone, both hands loosely wound in the fabric of her shirt. That night was the hardest thing she had done in years, and not in the way she had expected hardness to feel. She had expected exhaustion, and she got that, but she had not expected the specific quality of lying in the dark, waiting for a sound, her body already tuned to the rhythm of 90-minute intervals before she had consciously noticed the pattern. Coco woke every 90 minutes throughout the night. Each time the crying started again high, immediate no ramp-up, and each time she was already awake, already moving, repositioning, warming the formula she had bought that afternoon and offering it on the tip of her finger. She did not know if the talking helped Coco. She knew it helped her. Somewhere around 3, she stopped trying to sleep between the wakings and simply sat up against the headboard with Coco on her chest and her eyes open in the dark. She thought about the road, the green light, the dry asphalt, the silence before she saw it. the way the whole morning had shifted in the instant she did. She thought briefly about Coco's mother, and then chose not to follow that thought because there was nowhere useful it could go. She thought instead about her own mother, the way she would call on Sunday mornings, the way the calls had gotten shorter as both of them got busier. She thought about the woman on the phone at the rescue station, how patient she had been, how she had answered every question without making her feel like an idiot for having to ask. She thought about the forum post from the former primate keeper, who had taken the time to write something clear and useful and leave it on an old website for a stranger to find years later. The building made a sound, the heat cycling on a low mechanical breath. And Coco stirred at it and stilled again. The city outside went about its 3 a.m. business, quiet and ongoing, a few cars, a distant siren that came and faded, the particular silence that comes after a siren and is different from the silence before it. She kept coming back to the road, the green light through the cedars, the asphalt, the still small figure in the middle of it, with its arms raised, the way she had almost run past, the way her feet had slowed before she understood what she was seeing. At 3:47, Coco stirred, made a sound that was almost, but not quite a cry, and then settled again without fully waking. She put her hand on its back, barely touching, just enough pressure to feel the small rib cage rise and fall, and she held it there, and the night moved the rest of the way to morning, and she held it there the whole time. The second morning came in gray and cool, and she made coffee with Coco tucked inside her robe, and stood at the kitchen window watching the street below come awake. A delivery truck, a woman with a stroller. 2 men in work jackets, and thought one day down. That morning Coco ate. She had not understood until that moment how much she needed it to happen, had not measured the size of the thing she had been holding until it released. And she sat very still, while Coco lapped formula from the tip of her finger. The whole small face focused entirely on the task, and when it swallowed, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the forest road. She called her manager and said she needed the week. Her manager said, "Take it." And that was the whole conversation. The days settled into a shape full and purposeful at the edges, feeding and warmth and the steady logistics of keeping something alive, and then slow and wide in the middle, the afternoons opening into a quiet she had not felt before. She worked at her desk those afternoons with Coco on her shoulder, and Coco watched the screen with fixed attention, the cursor moving documents opening and closing. The scroll of text, watching it the way a cat watches something it cannot quite categorize, storing everything, waiting to understand. The occasional touch of a small hand against the side of her face. When something on the screen moved and Coco wanted a closer angle, was something she stopped noticing somewhere around the 3rd afternoon. On the 3rd day, Coco climbed to her shoulder on its own for the first time. It pulled itself up by her collar, face set with the concentration of the effort, and arrived at the top and looked around the room from this new height. She stayed completely still while it decided whether to stay, and it decided yes and stayed for the rest of the afternoon. It pulled at her hair, sometimes gently, with the exploratory patience of something that is starting to feel safe enough to be curious, that no longer needs every bit of energy for the question of surviving, and can spare a little for the question of what the world is actually like. She found herself slowing her movements around the apartment that afternoon, reaching for things more carefully, turning pages more quietly, as if there was a quality of stillness in the room she did not want to disturb. She read that afternoon quietly, a book open on her lap, while Coco investigated the window and the light coming through it. She read about Macaque troops in the mountains of Nagano, decades of observation. The same family lines tracked across generations, researchers watching how things moved through a group the way knowledge moves through a family. Not through blood, but through proximity and attention. She read that macaque infants spend their entire first year in almost constant contact with their mothers, riding on the back held against the chest, never far. And that this contact is not extra comfort, not something added on top of survival, but is itself how the infant learns to be alive in a body. She had been that rhythm for 6 days. The heartbeat Coco had pressed against on the kitchen floor, on the headboard in the dark, in the garden in the afternoon. And Coco had not been memorizing her, not really. but using her the way all very young things use, what is available as something steady, as a reason to keep going. She looked at Coco at the window and thought about the word ordinary, how many times this week she had looked at something ordinary and found it was not ordinary at all, that it had just been waiting for the right angle. On the fourth day, she took Coco into the small garden behind the building in the warmest part of the afternoon, and the moment the open air reached its face, the monkey went completely still. Not frozen with fear, but arrested, every small muscle holding its head, turning in slow, careful increments as it took in the sky. The trees along the fence, a crow that landed on a post and looked at them both with the unhurried authority of crows, and then left. Coco made a sound she had not heard before, low and exploratory with a question in it, and she answered without thinking, matching the pitch, and they stood there in the late afternoon doing that back and forth for a while. On the fifth day, she put her running shoes by the door. She looked at them for a while. She did not put them on. It was not that she could not leave. Her neighbor down the hall had offered twice, and the offer was genuine. It was that she did not want to go, which was a different thing. And she sat with that difference without trying to argue herself out of it. She had rearranged her entire week around an animal that had arrived without permission and would leave in 2 days and was not hers. And the rearranging had happened without a single moment of conscious decision. The way water finds its level, the way sleep finds you when you stop fighting it. She called a friend that evening, a doctor, someone who would tell her the truth without being unkind, and said, "I need you to tell me if what I'm feeling is real, or if it's something the brain does when it's taking care of something small." Her friend was quiet for a moment, thinking, not hesitating, and then said, "I don't think where a feeling comes from changes what it is." She sat with that answer for a long time and was still sitting with it when Coco climbed into her lap and fell asleep, and she put the phone down and let it rest. On the fifth evening, she said Coco's name out loud for the first time. Into the room while Coco was eating, just the word said plainly, to see what would happen. Coco looked up. She said it again, softer. Coco held her gaze for a moment with those amber eyes, satisfied with whatever it had found there, and went back to eating. That night, the last full night, Coco fell asleep on her chest in exactly the same position as the first night, the same spot, the same loose grip on her shirt, and she lay in the dark and felt the weight of it, slight and precise. And she paid attention to where it rested, the specific location of it, with the care of someone who understands they are memorizing something and intends to do it properly. She lay on her back and held Coco and let the hours move. She thought about the road in the forest, the green light, the arms raised the moment before she saw it, when everything was still what it always was. She thought about the finger, the one Coco had gripped first on the asphalt with both hands, the same one it still sometimes reached for. In sleep, wrapping around it in the dark without waking, as if checking that the original point of contact was still there, still solid, still real. She did not sleep much. She kept her hand on Coco's back and felt it breathe, and the night moved all the way to morning, and she let it. The alarm went off at 6. She lay still for 30 seconds. Long enough for the light to begin at the curtain edge, long enough for Coco to shift on her chest, without waking long enough to feel the last night of the weekend without rushing it. Then she got up. She fed Coco and bathed it carefully with the warm cloth the station had recommended, and she packed the bag formula for several days. The blanket that had absorbed the smell of her apartment, the worn shirt she had slept in all week, that she decided at some point without deciding to fold in at the bottom. She wrote a note for the keepers. Coco's schedule, the formula temperature, the sleeping positions, the sounds it made, and what each one had come to mean, the way it preferred the left shoulder to the right. She wrote about the way Coco went still when it was overwhelmed and needed a few minutes before it would eat, and the way you could tell the difference between that stillness and distress. Because in the overwhelmed stillness, its hands stayed loose. She wrote about the crow in the garden, how Coco had watched it leave and kept watching the empty fence post for a long time after. She wrote it as braver than it looks, which she was not sure was useful information for a wildlife keeper, but felt true, and she wrote it anyway. She wrote more than she needed to, and she knew it, and she kept going until the note was complete. When she folded it and put it in the bag, she stood for a moment at the counter, the same counter where she had first set Coco down 6 mornings ago, unchanged, the same window above it, the same strip of sky, and the room's complete indifference to everything that had happened in it felt strange in a way she could not quite name. The drive to the rescue station was 40 minutes through the morning traffic, and Coco rode in the carrier on the passenger seat, alert and still watching the city move past, through the mesh, the buildings, the people on the sidewalks, the other cars, all of it new from this particular angle. At the station, a young woman with a calm, quick manner received the bag in the carrier and read through the note carefully, pausing, nodding, asking one question about the formula temperature. And then she looked up and asked whether she had considered becoming a foster volunteer. She looked at Coco in the carrier. She thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. Then she shook her head and said, "Coco needs other macaques. Now it needs to learn what it is, and I'm not the right teacher for that part." The young woman nodded the nod of someone who has heard this said before, and hears it the same way every time. She lifted the carrier and walked toward the back of the building. Coco turned its head at the last moment and looked back through the mesh. The amber eyes, the wide focused gaze, the expression she had spent 6 days learning to read and could now read without pausing, and then it was around the corner, and the hallway was empty, and that was the end of it. She walked back to her car, through the station's small parking lot, past a row of low shrubs just starting to show new growth at the tips, past a bench with no one on it. She got into the driver's seat. She put her hands on the steering wheel and looked at the right one. The one with the finger Coco had gripped first on the road in the forest 6 days ago. The first point of contact, and she turned it over and looked at the palm, which looked exactly as it always had, the same lines in the same places as an ordinary hand. She had not done anything remarkable this week. She had looked things up on an old forum and made her best guesses and gotten some of them wrong and adjusted. Which is not expertise, which is just what it looks like when someone pays close attention and refuses to leave. When leaving would be easier. The grip had held. She had held. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was enough, and she sat with that for another moment before she started the car. She drove home through the ordinary city, which had been going about its business all week, and would continue to do so, quiet and continuous and entirely sufficient, and she let it. She let everything she had been holding for 6 days begin slowly to release. 6 months later, a photograph arrived from the rescue station, a printout in a plain envelope, with a handwritten note tucked inside that said, "Only thought you would want to see this." Coco was in the outdoor enclosure, larger. The infant softness gone from the face itself settled into something particular and legible, a personality in it now that had not been visible 6 months ago, or had been there but not yet formed enough to see. Coco was sitting on the shoulder of another macaque, both of them looking at something outside the frame of the photograph. Its arms were at its sides. It had found something to hold on to.